Think you know PCOS? Think again. From surprising skin changes to unexpected hair effects, these are 7 signs and symptoms of PCOS that nobody is talking about. Welcome back to my extremely unusual audience of baby nest loving people. If you are new here, you may not get that reference, or if you missed last week's video, you may not get that reference, but it's what we're going with now. As with all of my videos, I am a doctor, but I am not your doctor. This is for educational purposes only and to give you a basic understanding of some signs and symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome that you might want to bring up with your doctor or advanced practice provider. Big thank you to iRestore for sponsoring today's video. We'll hear more about them in a minute. If you want to know why I'm wearing this incredibly fashionable helmet, but I'll give you a hint. It is not because I have taken up a new form of adventure cycling, nor am I participating in a new contact sport of any kind. Let's jump into the video. I'm not going to get into the details of what polycystic ovarian syndrome is in this video, or even how we diagnose it, because I already have a video about that I'll link in the description box down below. This video is focused on often overlooked signs and symptoms of PCOS. But in brief, polycystic ovarian syndrome is a hormonal disorder that can cause dysregulation and signs and symptoms in pretty well all aspects of the body. It's often thought to be reproductive focused or only affect the reproductive organs and things like that, but that's not the case. It is an endocrine disorder, meaning it is a disorder of hormones, and that includes all hormones in the body, not just reproductive hormones. The first often overlooked symptom of PCOS we'll go through today is daytime sleepiness. It is not uncommon for people who have PCOS to come into the clinic and say, I am exhausted throughout the day. I have so much fatigue. I just can't keep my eyes open. The reason this can be associated with PCOS is because people who have PCOS are at an increased risk of sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a disorder where when you're sleeping, the muscles in the back of your throat tend to collapse a little bit too much and cut off your airway so you can't breathe. So when you try to take a breath, it's blocked. And by nature, that makes your body go, oh my gosh, wake up, you have to breathe. People who have this may not even know that they are waking up frequently through the night, but what ends up happening is that this happens over and over. There's many small awakenings, and it prevents you from getting that good, deep, restful sleep that you need to feel ready to go and energized the next day. You can kind of understand this if you think about like trying to charge your cell phone. If you plug it in and all night some little elf comes along and keeps unplugging it, leaving it unplugged for an hour, plugging it back in for 15 minutes, unplugging it again. Next morning, you wake up, you look at your phone, it didn't charge properly. Now it's already in the yellow and it's going to die before the end of the day. Basically, sleep apnea is like your battery just didn't get the opportunity to charge properly overnight while you were resting. And you may not even know that it's happening. That's why this is such an important symptom to not overlook, and something that you should bring up with your doctor or advanced practice provider if you're experiencing it. There's a myriad of reasons that have been postulated as to why people with polycystic ovarian syndrome may be at an increased risk of sleep apnea, but what I think is really fascinating and incredibly important here is that people with PCOS, when compared to a similar person, so same age, same height, same weight, same body makeup, generally the same person but doesn't have PCOS, they are still at an increased risk of sleep apnea just as a relationship to having the PCOS. So this isn't just a function of body weight or anything like that sometimes people associate with sleep apnea. There's an increased risk that seems to be independently associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome itself. The next often overlooked symptom of PCOS that I want to go over is mood changes. Hormonal imbalances caused by PCOS, particularly elevated androgen levels and changes in how your body responds to insulin, cause disruptions and changes in your brain chemistry. This can disrupt and alter levels of serotonin and other chemicals in the brain, which makes you at an increased risk of having mood lability and mood changes, and increases the chances of having things like anxiety and depression. Now pair that with the stress of having to manage a chronic health condition every day of your life that affects you in a lot of ways, something we know is independently associated with being at an increased risk of things like anxiety and depression. And it's pretty easy to see why people who have polycystic ovarian syndrome may be at an increased risk of being diagnosed with mental health conditions like anxiety and depression. Obviously, not everybody who has this is going to experience that, but I do think it's really important. And I also think it's really important to know that it is a function, yes, of the stress of a chronic health condition, but also of actual changes to your brain chemistry. So please bring it up with your doctor or advanced practice provider if you're experiencing things that might be related to that. The next one is really interesting to me, and it's something that I hardly ever hear people talking about, but is really common, and that is hair thinning. This is really common in people with PCOS, and in fact, it is not uncommon that people who have not been diagnosed with PCOS will present with this as their concern, and never once is it mentioned that it could be related to something like that. And they often go undiagnosed. So why is this the case? The medical term for this is androgenic alopecia, but you may have heard people refer to it as female pattern balding or female pattern hair loss. And basically what happens is people who have elevated levels of androgens like testosterone, which is commonly elevated in PCOS, will develop a condition where the hair thins kind of along the crown and the part of their hair. The reason for this is that those androgens cause shrinking of the hair follicles, and those are areas where it is particularly sensitive to this. So imagine all of these hair follicles where the hair grows from are like little hair factories, and as the androgen levels elevate, those hair follicle factories just can't make the quality of product that they used to. Suddenly the hair is thinner, it is shorter, it doesn't grow as well. Over time, some of those factories just shut down altogether as a result of these androgens yelling at them. What happens is when you have hair follicles in more sensitive places where you touch more or that gets parted and pulled on a little bit more, they're more likely to fall out and actually cause this appearance of thinning hair. The hair follicles and the hair on the rest of the head may be completely unaffected. You may think like, this is so weird, everything else is normal, it's just thinning in these two areas, and that's why. Unfortunately, this can be a really distressing symptom for some people. Studies indicate that people who experience hair thinning will indicate that their quality of life and self-esteem has been significantly negatively impacted, and a majority of women who experience this will say as much in the studies that we have. In fact, they will say that their quality of life is much more impacted than their male counterparts, who are also negatively impacted by hair thinning. The good news is that we have scientifically backed tools that can help with this, especially for people who are experiencing hair thinning that is causing a significant disruption to their quality of life or self-esteem. Aside from things like medications, which you can obviously chat with your doctor or advanced practice provider about, an effective at-home option is something called low-level light therapy. This is an evidence-based option that uses LED lights and lasers to promote hair regrowth for people experiencing hair thinning related to anything from PCOS to menopause. It's also where the sponsor of today's video comes in. iRestore Elite is by far the most powerful low-level light technology helmet that is available on the market for home use, and it can provide clinically apparent results in as little as 3 months of consistent use. iRestore Elite combines medical-grade lasers and LEDs to effectively provide powerful energy right to the hair follicle. Research, like this 2020 publication in Medicine, shows that these technologies, when used consistently, can increase hair density and hair growth for people who experience hair thinning, even when it's related to androgenic alopecia, which is the cause of hair thinning in PCOS, like we're discussing in this video, as well as things like menopause. It's an FDA-cleared device that uses that technology from these LED lights and lasers to provide stimulation to the hair follicles and help them re-enter their growth phase faster. When they reached out, I was, as I am with all of the sponsors on this channel, a bit skeptical at first. I went straight to the literature and found very promising supportive evidence. While everyone may not be bothered by hair thinning, we know that a majority of women who experience this are significantly impacted. And it doesn't have to be something that you just accept. It's comfortable, easy to use, and fits seamlessly into your routine, whether you use it while relaxing at home or responding to emails. There is a reason iRestore Elite is the #1 hair regrowth device on the market, and you can put your full confidence in them. They have a 12-month money-back guarantee, and if you use my link in the description box down below or go to irestorelaser.com/MDJ, you can get a $625 discount as well. So if you'd like to try out iRestore Elite and support my channel in the process, use that link in the description box down below. Now, let's move on to the next often overlooked symptom of polycystic ovarian syndrome. The next lesser known symptom that could be related to PCOS is right upper quadrant pain. This is basically discomfort in the upper right side of your abdomen, kind of below the rib cage on that side. And it can be related to PCOS in that people who have PCOS can have insulin resistance and elevated levels of insulin in their body. When that happens over time, this causes the body to deposit extra fat stores into the liver, which can cause the liver to become inflamed and a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes you might hear this referred to as non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it can happen even in people who don't have PCOS, obviously. And there are many causes of right upper quadrant discomfort, but this is the way that this sometimes presents, particularly in people who have PCOS. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is more common in people who have PCOS than their comparable counterparts. And as that fat buildup starts to happen, it can lead to kind of this vague discomfort sensation or even sometimes pain in the right side of the abdomen. The fifth often overlooked symptom of PCOS we'll be talking about today is darkening of the skin, but it happens in very specific places. This is something called acanthosis nigricans, and it happens in people who have insulin resistance, which we know people who have polycystic ovarian syndrome are at an increased risk of insulin resistance. So basically what happens is with PCOS, all of these hormones are disrupted. Your body stops responding to insulin like it should. And in order to help combat that, your pancreas, trying to do well, increases the insulin levels in your blood so that those receptors that are responding to the insulin can be flooded with more insulin and hopefully get back to normal functioning. And what happens is over time, these chronically elevated insulin levels cause cells to overturn faster, particularly in areas of the skin that have high friction. That would be places like the back of the neck, the groin, the underarms, anywhere that you would maybe be moving against yourself more frequently than other places on your body. So what happens is that skin becomes kind of thickened and velvety in certain patches and it appears darker. It's kind of your body's way of saying, hey, I think your insulin levels might be elevated. You should get that checked out. The sixth commonly overlooked symptom of PCOS is low libido or low sexual satisfaction. In addition to mood changes that we've already discussed earlier, chronically elevated insulin levels can also decrease blood flow and potentially contribute to less physical arousal and less satisfaction during sexual activities. So when the hormonal effects on our brains and our bodies, the way we look at ourselves with regards to body image issues and things like that are all combined with polycystic ovarian syndrome, it's easy to see how this could be a contributor both from a physiology standpoint with regards to the changes in the hormonal levels, but also just from a mental standpoint with regards to its effect on our brain chemistry and how we see ourselves, leaving people with PCOS at an increased risk of having low libido and low sexual satisfaction. When the hormonal effects of PCOS are paired with the mood changes that can happen and the brain chemistry changes that can happen, as well as things like how we view ourselves and our self-esteem and the effects that some of these symptoms of PCOS are known to have, it's easy to see why people who have uncontrolled PCOS would be at an elevated risk of having low sexual satisfaction or low libido. The seventh often overlooked symptom of PCOS is binging and purging. Hormonal changes and imbalances and significant spikes in insulin levels can lead people to have really intense cravings for food and a sense of loss of control around their eating habits. And when this happens, sometimes unhealthy eating habits and disordered eating can emerge as kind of an attempt at a compensatory mechanism. Meaning, if you're more at risk of binge eating because of the hormonal changes and imbalances that you're experiencing, you're also under certain circumstances going to be at an increased risk of trying to come up with, either consciously or unconsciously, a way to combat the effects of that. We're under a lot of societal pressure to conform to certain body types, and binge eating often makes that very difficult for people. It is a really vicious cycle because the binge eating is probably related in large part to these hormonal changes and insulin spikes. But regardless, it does put people who have PCOS at an increased risk of binging and purging type disordered eating. There are a lot of ways that this can come out, including excessive exercise or the use of medications that can be very unhealthy and dangerous, vomiting, things like that. And it's really important that if you're experiencing any of this, you get help for it. just know that binge eating can be related to things that are chemically going on in your body. It's not something you have to be ashamed about, but it is something that should be addressed. So while every person who has PCOS and every person who experiences disordered eating is unique and different, it's pretty easy to see why people who have PCOS would be at an increased risk of developing these behaviors and compensatory mechanisms. And again, it just gets compounded by all of the things we've talked about in this video with regards to physical effects of PCOS, mental effects, how some people's body image and self-esteem alters because of this, and it can be really dangerous. So I encourage you, if you're having any of these signs or symptoms that I listed in this video, to bring it up with your doctor or advanced practice provider. I hope that you learned something today. If you're new here and you'd like to subscribe, we'd love to have you. If you don't want to subscribe, that is perfectly fine. But if you learned something, please tell me what you learned in the comments down below and give a like on this video. While you're at it, check out the sponsor of today's video, iRestore Elite, and I'll see you next Monday.